Study Group would like to officially welcome you all to today's discussion, the 9th of March 2024. And we shall be discussing the Carlson-Putin interview. Before I say a few things about that, I would like to welcome all of you who have arrived nice and early for today's interesting discussion. I'd like to welcome the following Pigeon himself, who is our co-chair and who has been very dynamic and whose contribution has really transformed us. I'd like to welcome Pamela, DJ Mr. P, my sister Joan from GAC, Brother Joseph, our brother Kama, who I believe is based in Tanzania, if I'm not wrong. Then Zambia, is it? Oh, Zambia, yes, Zambia. Then Mankuyo, Ross, Christopher. I'm not sure if I've met Ross. Also welcome Jules Yamonchi, Anisat Yamonchi, and then our own sister Myra. I know not all of you attend our Thursday consensus classes, but some of you here do. If you'd like to, please contact Brother Pigeon, who will enable you or let you know how you can join us. So welcome, brothers and sisters, to today's meeting. We had the part 1 of the Carlson-Putin interview, and then economic issues arose. So we thought we should have the part 2. It is a discussion. So the point of the presentation that Brother Pigeon will be making is principally to stimulate the discussion. We would like you, the audience who are here, to really contribute and to the discussion. We want to hear your voices, your views, your thinking, your opinions. Interestingly, during the consensus classes, we say we want to hear people's thinking. But on this one, we want to hear your opinions, your views, your perspectives, how you see the world, and so on and so forth. So this is part 2, and the part 2 is on the economic outlook. So basically, Putin said a few things that had implications for Africa's political economy. And here I'm thinking about the dollar, or we are thinking about the dollar, the gas pipelines, and I think our resources. So those are some of the things that he said. That and then China, the role of China, or how Putin views China, who is described as, who the US and Western elites have described as their strategic competitor, as they put it. But in this discussion, we hope to show that, contrary to that, the real strategic competitor of the West is Africa and not China, and so on. So yeah, so so we would like to welcome you all, and to the discussion. Some of the discussion points will be trade and investment, flows between Africa and Russia, global food and energy security, the potential for increased political stability within the region. And let's remember that Gaza is in Africa. A lot of people sometimes forget that Gaza and Israel are on African soil, and opportunities for Africa to leverage its resources and strategic position for future growth. So, welcome. Before I let Brother Pigeon start, I'd like to comment that the great service that Carlson did for us. If you recall, those of us who live in Europe and we live in England could not get news directly from Russia anymore through
Russia RT, Russia Today.
Yes, to Russia Today, yeah, Russia TV. In fact, they even had a studio here in London, and the government of the United Kingdom decided to close it all down. So we couldn't get news from RT anymore, and we were treated, in my view, as if we were children who could not hear both sides of a story and make up our minds. And the whole point of that was so that the Western elites can control the narrative for us, as if we were children. I know that Thomas Paine said that the British people are really like children, but not to that extent. And what shocked some of us was that the Labour Party, who we thought would stand up for our rights, also just went along. And so we've not had, for those of us here in Europe anyway, maybe different from those of you on African soil, we didn't have direct news. We didn't know what was going on. And so the narrative was very controlled. And so in comes Carlson's interview, and suddenly we hear from Putin directly, telling us what they think or what the Russian government thinks. And that Carlson-Putin interview really destroyed the elite narrative that they were feeding us. And so they were very, very angry. Mrs. Clinton called him a useful idiot, and other people have used different words to describe him. But he said that he just wanted us to hear Putin for himself. So let's go on to the second part of the interview. Let's remember, for us here, the important thing is, what does it mean for us as Africa? Not for Ukraine, not for Russia itself, not for the West, but for Africa. What did the interview mean for us as Africans? Thank you very much. So, Brother Pigeon, have you had enough time now to put the magazine in there?
Yes, I've already shared the magazine via the chat.
Excellent. So you proceed to do your presentation, and I'll look at the magazine and see what we can share. You carry on.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Kwame, and greetings to all comrades who have joined us today. Of course, we are here to discuss about the Putin part, as it has been said. Our part one is available on our YouTube channel. The recording was shared there. But today I decided to look a bit on a little research a bit on how has been the relationship between the Africa and the Soviet Union, of course, now the Russia. And part of this presentation I'll be doing is a brief presentation on how the Russia, during even the Soviet Union, interacted with Africa, and in instances, like examples of where they interacted with various countries. That's the intention of this. So from this is just to be aware a bit of the relationship between Africa and Russia, as we are doing the first or the last part of this conversation. So that's why I thought this is important. And I'll start straight to what I've shared in my screen. So the Africa-Soviet Union relations are diplomatic, political, military, and cultural relationship between the Soviet Union and Africa, and range from 1945 to 1991. We know from 1991 is during the Cold War, or the Cold War period. So the Soviets took little interest until the decolonization of Africa of the 1950s and early 1960s, which created opportunity to expand their influence. So Africans were not reprieved to the Soviet model of socio-economic development. Instead, the Soviet offered financial aid, munitions or ammunition, credits for purchase from the Soviet bloc, while avoiding direct involvement in armed conflict. Temporary alliances were secured with Angola and Ethiopia. The 1991 dissolution of Soviet Union left its successor state, Russia, with greatly diminished influence. So let's do an overview a bit of what has happened. So until the death of Stalin, that is in 1953, the Soviet Union showed very little interest in Africa. Its founders, Vladimir Lenin, did argue in his famous book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, that imperialism was inherently caused by capitalism and the inaugural session of Comintern in 1919 included a declaration for solidarity for the colonial slaves of Africa and Asia. However, most of its attempts to spread communalism or communism were initially focused on Europe, and this did not prevent Lenin and Stalin from trying to force all the former territories of the Russian empires into the Soviet Union. It did not appear right for the revolution because it was almost entirely controlled by the European imperial powers, with the peasantry under the political control of the tribal leaders and low level of proletarian consciousness in the small working class. So Joseph Stalin had a fleeting interest in claiming the former Italian colony of Tripolitania in modern-day Libya, but the NATO containment policy blocked those efforts. In the Comintern, the chief spokesperson for Africa were whites from the Communist Party of South Africa. After 1953, the continent underwent a rapid process of decolonization, whereby nearly all the colonies became independent nations. However, African nationalist movements were led by the better educated young middle class that had little exposure to communism or socialism. The Soviet leaders, beginning with Nikita Khrushchev, were excited by the enthusiastic young Black Africans who first came to Moscow for a major youth festival in 1957. Patrice Lumumba's People's Friendship University was established in Moscow in 1960s to provide higher education to students from developing countries. So it became an integral part of the Soviet cultural offensive in non-aligned countries. In the early 1960s, the KGB and GRU began focusing more intelligence operations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. So the Kremlin saw an opportunity and established four foreign policies goals regarding Africa. First, it wanted a lasting presence on the continent, including port facilities in the Indian Ocean. Second, it wanted to gain a voice in African affairs, primarily by supporting local communist parties and providing economic and military aid to the government. Third, it wanted to undermine Western NATO influence. However, Kremlin was reluctant to send Soviet troops because of its fear of major escalation with the NATO powers. So Fidel Castro sent 300,000 Cuban troops to Africa to support fellow revolutionaries against Western imperialism. Kremlin thought Castro's adventurism was dangerous, but it was unable to stop it. And finally, after 1962, it was engaged in a bitter controversy with China for influence and control of local radical movements. So Stalin thought in terms of a black and a white world of class conflict, capitalists versus the proletarians. The Khrushchevs said it was a three-way contest, the third pole being bourgeois nationalist movement that were inherently anti-imperialist and were demanding decolonization across the globe. The favorite technique, therefore, was to identify the Soviet Union with the rising tide of nationalism, to demonstrate that they, in Moscow, were engaged in a common struggle against Western imperialism. So Moscow also expected that the Soviet model of industrialization and nationalization would prove attractive. But that approach did not resonate with the nationalist forces, which were black-based and on the small middle class and were socializing the means of production. So the passive reliance on the Soviet model of development failed because of the unreliability of local leaders, and by the Congo crisis, the Kremlin learned that it was essential to find and promote ideologically reliable leaders who needed Soviet help to build enough military strength controlling Africa. So what you see here, the picture here you see, is actually in 1961, Soviet stamp marking the 5th World Congress of Trade Union, showing an African breaking the chains. That's the picture you see here. Then down here, you see a picture of Soviet military instructors with Namibian guerrillas during the South African border war. That was in late 1970s. Then another picture down here, you see the 1961 Soviet stamp with the slogan, "Freedom to the nations of Africa." So let's go to typical examples of country, just few of them that actually had a relationship with Russia. We start with Algeria. So as early as 1930s, the Algerian Communist Party made up an important faction of the Algerian nationalist movement. However, it supported France in the growing unrest and was forced to dissolve in 1956. Its activists joined the Militant National Liberation Front. Throughout the ferocious Algerian War of Independence in 1950, Moscow provided military, technical, and material assistance to the FLN and trained hundreds of its military leaders in the USSR. The Soviet Union was the first country in the world to recognize the Provisional Government of Algerian Republic in 1962 by establishing diplomatic relationship a few months before the official proclamation of its independence. Algeria became a leader of the non-aligned movement and largely targeted its rhetoric towards the United States rather than France. However, Algeria was an oil exporting country and the United States was a principal customer for oil and a major supplier of machineries and engineering and technical engineering expertise. So by 1960s, both the Soviet and the Chinese were angling for Algerian attention. Moscow extended $100 million and credit to buy Soviet export, while China provided $50 million in credit. Ahmed Ben Bella, in power between 1963 to 1965, leaned towards China. Then he was overthrown by his defense minister, Haouri Bonamedienne, who was in charge between 1965 to 1976. Algeria strongly supported the Palestinian cause, and when Moscow was lukewarm in support of the Six-Day War in 1967, Algeria refused to let the Soviet build a naval base in Mars El Kabir. Paris sold Algeria France warplanes in 1968, looking for counterbalance the Soviet influence. So operating independent from Kremlin, Fidel Castro turned Algeria into Cuba's first and closest ally in Africa. That was between 1961 to 1965. Havana provided military and civilian assistance. The Cuban Revolutionary Armed Forces soldiers, however, did not engage in combat, and after the overthrow of Castro's friend Ben Bella, Cuba cut back its involvement. So Algeria supported, of course, the Polisario Front, a left-wing movement supported by Moscow that battled for 10 years in control of the Western Sahara from Morocco. The United States, Egypt, Belgium, and France supported Morocco, and Algeria was increasingly identified with the Soviet side of the Cold War. Let's check a bit Angola. In Angola, in a complex civil war with outside intervention, Soviet military aid went to the Movimento Popular de Liberação de Angola, MPLA. By 1976, the military spheres were the pivot of Angolan-Soviet relations. The Soviet Navy benefited from its use of Angolan port to stage excesses. So during 1956 to 1986, as part of the long South African border war, which was between 1966 to 1990, the Soviets supplied and trained combat units for Namibian, which is the SWAPO, and Angolan MPLA at the African National Congress ANC military training camp in Tanzania. In 1986, Mikhail Gorbachev rejected the idea of a revolutionary takeover of the South African government and advocated a negotiated settlement. Let's look at Congo. Facing enormous turmoil in the newly independent Republic of Congo, which is the Leopoldville, Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba, the charismatic leader of the Movement National Congolese, reacted by calling for assistance from the Soviet Union. The Kremlin promptly sent military advisors and munitions. The involvement of the Soviets split the Congo government and led to an impasse between Lumumba and the conservative president Joseph Kasavubu, who was the anti-communist. So President Kasavubu used his command of the army to launch a coup d'etat, expelling the Soviet advisor and establishing a new government under his own control. Lumumba was taken captive and subsequently executed in 1961. A rival government, the Free Republic of Congo, was founded in the eastern city of the Stanville by Lumumba supporters, which was led by Antonio Gizenga. So Kremlin supported Gizenga, but did not want to take the international risk involved in delivering material aid to the blockade Oriente province. Instead, Kremlin provided Gizenga with financial aid and urged his ally to run blockade assist Gizenga while avoiding a direct conflict with the West on the issues. So Gizenga regime crashed in 1962. But also in Egypt, we have a history, which in 1950s, Gamal Abdel Nasser began to follow an anti-imperialist policy that earned him enthusiastic support from the communist government of the USSR. During the Nasser years, many young Egyptians studied in the Soviet universities and military schools. Among them was the future president Hosni Mubarak, who went for training in a military pilot school in Kantaya base. The relationship went so within years after the death of Nasser, when the new president Anwar Sadat started reorienting the country towards the West. We see that until on May 27, 1971, a friendship treaty was signed between the two countries, but relationships were nevertheless declining. The Nixon administration was working behind the scenes with Sadat to bolster his plans to send Russians home, which they did in July 1972. So that's the history there. There's a history of Ethiopia here, where we see in this picture the Cuban artillerymen manning a Soviet-supplied howitzer during the Ogaden War of 1977, where the Soviet foreign policy in Somalia and Ethiopia was based on the Horn of Africa strategic location for international trade and shipping, as well as its military importance. Neither country followed the Kremlin directive unquestionably. In 1974, as we can see, coup installed the DAG, a communist military junta under General Mengistu Haile Mariam. It proclaimed Marxism-Leninism as its official ideology and became close ally of Moscow. That's the relationship between Ethiopia. As we move along, there are other relationships that I want to mention very fast. There was a relationship between Russia and Guinea, which you can see that President John F. Kennedy eagerly sought to establish good relationship with the newly independent African nation in the wake of Kovachev's 1961 speech that proclaimed the USSR intention to intervene in anti-colonial struggles around the world. Since most nations in Europe, Latin America, and Asia had closely chosen sides, Kennedy and Kovachev both looked to Africa as the next Cold War battleground. Under the leadership of Ahmed Sékou Touré, the former French colony of Guinea in West Africa, proclaimed its independence, of course, in 1958 and immediately sought foreign aid. President Dwight Eisenhower,
It's Eisenhower. Brother Pidgey, it's Eisenhower.
Eisenhower, okay, was hostile to Touré. So the African nation quickly turned to the Soviet Union, making its claiming first success story in Africa. However, President John F. Kennedy and his Peace Corps director, Sergeant Shriver, tried even harder than Kovachev. By 1963, Guinea had shifted away from Moscow into a close friendship with Washington. There's a story of Morocco where in the 15 years Western Sahara War, the Soviet Union supported the Polisario Front and sent arms via Algeria. In the context, King Hassan II of Morocco said in 1980 that Morocco and the Soviet Union are at war. The South African story is here, which is a little scripture here that was written during the war, which is the apartheid-era propaganda leaflet issued to South African military personnel in 1980s. The pamphlet decries Russian colonialism and oppression. It was written to say that to protect South Africa against Russian colonialism and oppression, to protect freedom of worship and speech, to protect our families and friends for peace. That's what was written there. And I realize there are a lot of stories here that will cover South Africa. Of course, Communist Party, SASP, operating under the direction of the Comintern, was a strong supporter of African National Congress. So South Africa-wide politicians routinely denounced the ANC as a devious communist plot to overthrow the government. The Soviet Union withdrew its ambassador after the Sharpeville massacre in 1960s. After South Africa became a republic in 1961 and was expelled from the Commonwealth nations, relations were very cold. In 1961, the ANC and the SACP created a joint military wing known as the Spear of the Nation. South Africans considered the Soviet Union an enemy because it financially and military support communism on the African continent. Pretoria's severe diplomatic ties with Moscow in 1956 because of its support to SACP. So during 1956 to 86, as part of the long South African border war, the Soviets supplied and trained combat units in Mozambique, on Namibia, which is the SWAPO, and Angola MPLA, at the ANC military training camps, as we had said here in Tanzania. So South Africa government evoked the term Roy Gevar to refer the political and military threat posed by the Soviet Union support for the guerrilla wings of anti-apartheid movements such as SWAPO and ANC. Despite of the widely reported Soviet support for ANC and otherwise liberation movement, the Soviet Union has engaged in some trade with South Africa during the apartheid era, mostly involving arms and some mineral resources. So from 1960 to 64, De Beers or the De Beers had a unique arrangement to sell Soviet diamonds from Siberia. During the 1980s, a convoluted series of arms sales involving the Sassi, the Danish ship Pierre Vesta, and Manuel Noriega of Panama ultimately aimed to transfer Soviet arms and military vehicles to South Africa. Around this time, the South African military, which is Arms Corps, had a team of experts working in Leningrad involved in jet engine development. So the last country here is Burkina Faso. And you see Burkina Faso refers to, of course, the historical relationship between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic and Republic of Burkina Faso, formerly the Upper Volta. If you can check as it goes along their history a bit, the diplomatic relationship between the two countries was established for the first time on 18 February 1967, during the first years of the Colonel General Shanguele Lamizana military rule in Upper Volta. So during the 1960s, we see that USSR was sometimes derisively referred to Upper Volta with rockets, coined by a journalist Zan Smiley, referencing USSR disproportion of defense sector over relatively underdeveloped civilian economy. Bamina Congress Nedi, a later prominent government minister, served as the Volta ambassador to USSR for some time. One of his successors was Obkiri Makiao. So in 1983, Captain Thomas Sankara came to power in a military coup, while a radical left-wing revolutionary who had studied Karl Marx and Lenin, Sankara, who attempted to implement what he dubbed as democratic and popular revolution, did not align with the Soviet Union, preferencing non-alignment and self-sufficiency. Nonetheless, the relationship with strongly pro-Soviet states such as Cuba was close, and Sankara maintained friendly relationship with the USSR despite of many contentions. So basically, those are the relationships in brief of what has gone on between Africa and those other states. So I like to end here. Brother Kwame, you can come in because of time.
Yeah, thank you very much. But before I make any comment and invite those here, we now have 18 participants to also share their views on the Putin-Carlson interview. What would you say, Brother PJ, of all that you've read, what is your conclusion? And how do you see this relating with the Carlson-Putin interview?
Okay, basically from my side is that based on these historical evidences, it's very clear that despite of every Russian relationship with Africa, of course, based on also their resources that they wanted to take from Africa, but it's very clear historically that Russia stood with many of African liberation movement during the independence to help them in one or the other to get free from the yoke of the European colonizers during that time. And it's also very clear that many of the African, of course, leaders and students of the early stage also went to Russia for their studies. But of course, what I get clearly was the fight on ideology, the communism and what the capitalists was trying to propel that brought a clear differences based on Africa. Because you must realize that the Russia involvement in Africa based on this historical context showed very clear that Russia got into Africa in contradiction or in dialectical movement with the East, with the West. The Europe that wanted to colonize and take over African resources, and Russia was coming in. So the enmity and the problems of Russia and the West probably started from Africa, and their interest to come in Africa, despite of the historical context that Putin is giving us on how Russia was then broken into many other things. But it's very clear that Russian involvement early enough and its support during the struggle for independence in many of African countries might have been the peaking point of the serious relationship that now became very worse between the West and the Russian. And I think that based on also the recent interview, it's very clear that maybe the West might think that if they can be able to topple Russia and probably the China, then they might gain a monetary or the unitary or sole control over Africa, because the Russia and the East is becoming like a competitor towards the control of Africa. In one way or the other, either the East want to take over Africa control or want to take Africa out of the West control, and therefore US is thinking of how they can bring down Russia and China. So that's what I think from my point of view. But the main central point here is the resources of Africa. Why is the West in Africa? Is the resources of Africa. And why the East is coming like Russia in Africa is to help the African get out from the actual oppressions and what you call exploitation of their resources from the West, but also they have an interest of the resources from Africa, because Africa is the center of all these wings, either East or West, we are the center. That's what I can say.
Okay, well, thank you very much. You've said a lot. Just a brief history, just so everyone knows. George Padmore was a communist, wasn't he? And George Padmore served in the Politburo of the Soviet Union. And George Padmore left the Politburo. And the Politburo, if you don't know, was the highest decision-making body of the Soviet Union, the USSR, which was dismantled at the end of the 1980s. And George Padmore left the Politburo and wrote a book called African, I think the title was African Nationalism or Communism, something like that. And George Padmore's argument was that he wanted the Soviets or the communists to fight for the independence of Africa. And the communists argued that the Africans should wait until communism has overcome capitalism. And then, naturally or logically, Africa would be free, because the domination of Africa was because of the capitalist West. And people like George Padmore were not happy with that kind of argument. So he left the Politburo and wrote that book. When George Padmore then joined Nkrumah in Ghana, which was liberated, there was a big argument between Padmore and Nkrumah, and it was dubbed the Nkrumah-Padmore debates. And the argument was that the Soviet Union perhaps that the Africans should not rely on the Soviet Union. But Nkrumah's argument was that, yes, but the communists have shown themselves to be friends of Africa because they were interested in our liberation. So I thought I should share that history. Now, in terms of some of the things you've said, there are a lot of hands up. We'll hear from everyone, by the way. In terms of all that you've shared, there was a belief in certain African circles that the real interest of the Soviet Union was in the resources of Africa. And there was a fear, which you rightly pointed out, on the part of the West, that all Africa would do, if it came from under the control of the West, all it would do was replace the West with the East. In other words, that Africa will not really be free. It will just change, if you like, its political masters. And those African elites who preferred the West to Russia because they hated communism and so on, they, as leaders, prefer to be under Western domination than Russian domination or Soviet Union domination. And this played out in the way our elites ran the countries. So again, I thought I should make that point. Right, the floor is open, but I don't know if you all know, but we normally share this document called the magazine, and we kind of share the magazine as part of our Saturday meeting in order to throw light on whether we think the news being put together on Africa, whether they are whether they advance our interest, or whether they advance Africa in terms of our continental union. So let me just quickly go through this in 5 minutes. Brother Pigeon, is it on the screen? Is it on the screen?
Yes.
Yes, comrade, it's up.
We've got lots of mines. We don't have a lot of money, so we've got lots of mines.
Yeah, I'll go through it quickly. So apparently, so this is the inside. This is the page. Is the inside story, and as you can see, it's about Nigeria, Ghana, Haiti sports data, a review, and Uganda. And I'll just summarize the story. So there are food protests in Nigeria. The LGBT law in Ghana, Akufo-Addo has not signed it into law because he is caught between domestic politics and the IMF that is threatening to withhold from his government about 3.8 billion, as I understand it. Haiti's role in the overthrow of the enslavers, and the fact that we have Kenya saying it was sending, or this has been ruled unconstitutional by the Kenyan court. We have the Kenyan government sending policemen, which he has no power to do, to Haiti. And we kind of wonder what role, why he's really doing that. So the other thing also is data and so on. So I want to just cut this one short because of the topic and the many hands that are up. So I'm just going quickly through the pages. I'll just flick through them. There's a Ghana story. And there's a Haiti story. Brother Pigeon has shared it in the chat if you want to have a look at it. Do. And then with the Uganda one, which is coming up, this is all about sports. And then finally, there was this sports, and then a lot of sports in this week's publication. And then we have data, which is about freedom of information, how if we got it, we'll be more free, or we will inform citizens. And then finally, the Ugandan story. The story is that the speaker somehow gets $100,000 to disburse per week. And a journalist called Agatha Atuhere has broke the news, but the speaker hasn't commented. And people think it is due with corruption. Anyway, so that is a story. The question we always raise on how to end extreme poverty, giving cash directly to the poor. So that is the argument here. If you want to end extreme poverty, give the poor a lot of money, or give them money. And that is it. The question we always raise is, are these Pan-African stories, are these stories that define for us what Pan-Africa should look like? Do these new stories put together reflect what the radical Pan-Africanists want? And if it isn't, what are we going to do about it? Because nobody will do it for us. We have to do it for ourselves. So thank you for that. The time now is 10 to 8. There are a lot of hands up. I'll go one at a time. And then at some point, I'll hand over to Brother Pigeon. Brother Joseph, if you can come in first, please. And then after you, Jules.
Yeah. Good evening. Good day to everyone. Good night to all on the call tonight. I think I want to help to put in context the involvement of the Soviet Union with Africa or the developing countries. One of the things that concession that the Soviet got coming out as part of the victors on the so-called Second World Tribal, European World Conflict, what they call World War II, was that the colonial powers, particularly US, and I think France, yeah, that they would decolonize. And so you have processes starting in the UN, including decolonization committee and all that thing as the years went on. So people tend to forget that. And just as how Haiti has played a big role in the process of countries having so-called so-called independence, political independence, just so the Soviet Union played a role in the decolonization, beginning of the decolonization of the developing world. So, and it must be said that all countries have interests. So there's to pretend no, but at the same time, the extent to which a country puts its interests ahead of others. You just have to look at Cuba, who with a tremendous sacrifice have given to the world much more, and also the cause of Black liberation more than anyone might ever do. So these are, I just wanted to put those into context. In terms of the Tucker Carlson interview, I still haven't finished listening to it, but every time I listen to the interview, I cannot help and feeling grateful that at least what was hidden in the dark have now come out in the light, because many people were saying various elements of what have come out since that time, whether it's Chicago professors and others, whether it's some former US McGregor and all of them. It has come to the fore now that they were right. And that narrative of Russia aggression, and up to now you can't, to me, I see no aggression in Russia. Not because I'm a fanatical supporter of Putin, but if you're a student, as he said, a clear thinker, you come to your conclusion for yourself. For most of us, our conclusion have been, I shouldn't say most of us, for a lot of people, they allow other people to make the conclusion for them even before they begin to examine what's the issue at hand. So I'll just stop here. I thought I'll just start the ball rolling by injecting what I've just said. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Jules and Anisette Yamonchi. Jules, unmute yourself and speak, please. We've only had up for a long time.
Hello.
Yes, please speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please speak. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I am in the Republic of Benin, West Africa.
Interesting.
And I thank all the organizers of this webinar. So what is the interest of this kind of webinar is to show the role that play Russia and the former Soviet Union in the development of Africa. I have lived in Moscow for 13 years. I'm a graduate from the Patrice Lumumba University. I want to say that Russia or the former Soviet Union is not an evil country. It is a country that is friendly to Africa. For 63 years, Russia and the former Soviet Union had graduated more than 300,000 specialists, from the university. None of the Western countries have not done that. And it's the same to the third world country, Latin America and the Caribbean. So there is a need to see Russia as a positive friend of Africa. And Russia is doing everything to decolonize the country, which is not good to the Western country. So that is what I want to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's go to Brother Glenroy, who had his hand up earlier.
Yes, greetings. I think when you were talking about Padmore, that perhaps he disagreed with the white communists in the Politburo, not necessarily communists, because obviously he himself was a communist, and they are African communists were around it. But I think his awakening, if we can call it that, came a little late after his numerous attack against Marcus Garvey. So it was interesting to see that. But if you go into the archive in Ghana, you'll see some of his writing. And there's a famous word that he says to either Eisenhower or Johnson, I don't remember who was in president at the time, but an appeal to better treatment for African people in the US. And he said if he did that, he could make America great again. So it's an interesting circle that here we are, Trump making America great again, stealing the words of African activists. But I put my hand up because there's a term that I think we need to hold on to. And if you like, it was more of a boast. I don't think the apartheid regime coined the phrase, but we had a phrase in those days of fighting against apartheid where all of those countries, Zimbabwe or Rhodesia as it was, Mozambique, Angola, Namibia, were all considered to be the frontline state and frontline to apartheid South Africa. In other words, it was able to fend off and carry out an atrocious war against all these nations surrounding it. If you go to Namibia and see the roads and the type of roads that they have there, they are designed to take troops to Angola. They're almost all straight in through Windhoek into Angola. Because, of course, then South Africa was controlling Namibia. And I think we mustn't forget Kunta Kinaval and what the Cubans did then. And remember, the Cubans had to be circling Luanda for about an hour in the run-up to independence because they couldn't land in Angola until independence had been declared. And there was a real danger, I think the story was that if they weren't careful, they may run out of fuel flying around in circles. But the reason the Cubans had to do it, and of course we know that these were changing circumstances within the Soviet Union. The reason the Cubans had to do it was because the Russians refused to intervene in the same way. So we need to balance out the contribution. And I heard somebody said recently, I don't know, remember what program it was on, that the Russians were never involved in enslavement. Well, I would say check that with a pinch of salt, but don't forget, this wasn't the Soviet Union, this was Imperial Russia, this was the Tsar. So to suggest that they were not involved in some activity around repression of African people before the Soviet Union is to give them credit beyond the necessity that they're entitled to. But I haven't listened to the Colton interview. I hear people talking about it, and that's a source of information for me. But on the one hand, Soviet participation and providing resource is and was a very important contribution. Even though they didn't go in Angola, clearly the Cubans were there with Russian weapons. And just one final thing, Chair. When we think about NATO and Ukraine, we should also remember what happened with the Soviet US blockade of Cuba when the Soviet tried to lay missiles on Cuban soil. Now, lots of people think that that was a wrong move on the part of the Russians, and yet they don't say that it was a wrong move by NATO to be pushing Ukraine and NATO membership on the Russian border. So if it's wrong to put missile on Cuba, and I understand the argument about, you know, the distance from Miami, it's also wrong to be creating NATO hubs on Russia's border. So yes, thank you for the reminder of some of the history that some of us have had to live through or have lived through. They said that it's a curse, may you live in interesting times. Thank you.
Yes, Brother Glenroy, thank you very much. So when we heard Brother Pigeon read some of the names like Khrushchev, which he was having difficulty pronouncing, and so Eisenhower, that tells you perhaps he was right that we are old men who have seen these things and seen these people and so on. Thank you very much for reminding us some of these things. We have a brother who is part of our class, but he lives in Swaziland, and he has made a point to us, and he says he has evidence that the Russians are supporting the Swazi king to oppress the Swazi people. So I hear what you said, Jules, and we heard what you said in the overall scheme of things. But let's also remember that, it's not.
Just to say that.
Yeah.
Just to say that our report is that it's actually Wagner that are there, along with Taiwanese. So there is a mixture of that. We have a comrade who come to the Sunday International that keep us informed. So it is true there are Russian people there, but they are from the Wagner group, mercenaries for want of a better word, but obviously who they are and the relationship now with Putin is obviously different. I wonder, but just as a sideline, did that come up at all in the interview? About Wagner?
Carlson didn't ask those questions. In fact, Putin later on said that he didn't ask him hard questions. But what occurred to me hearing that news was whether if it's Wagner that is there, then that now that the relationship between Wagner and the Putin's government has changed, is it possible that the government wasn't aware of what Wagner was doing in Swaziland? I don't know. I'm just asking. And if he didn't, maybe now that Wagner is under Russian government control, maybe they can do something about it. Because we can't have Russian forces in one part of Africa oppressing our people, and then another part in the Sahel saying that they are liberating us. So anyway, right. Let's hear from more and more people. We've got. So if I call your name, you want to speak, please speak. If not, just ask me to move on. Thank you, Pamela.
Yeah, I'm just listening. Thank you.
Thank you. John. You'll have to unmute yourself, John.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I find this, I'm so glad, I used to come to this group. I'm so glad I'm back. It's so stimulating. It's overwhelming. Anyway, I learned so much from that, what was read out. But the main thing for me that I would say is it was very interesting to learn about that connection. Very interesting. And I was going to start to feel a little bit uplifted. When I saw that stamp, the Olympic stamp, I can't remember what it was, but the stamp with the African on it, I just thought that blew my mind.
Yeah. In fact, maybe Brother Pigeon can share that stamp again. Brother Pigeon.
Just as a visual, I just,
yeah.
Russia
Brother
did
Pigeon,
that.
can you share that stamp again, please? Thank you. Yeah, carry on whilst Brother Pigeon shares the stamp.
Yeah, just as I felt, and when I heard about these sort of, there's another one as well. You had another one. Oh, there was a poster. That's it. And I've never seen an African portrayed in at that time by a white nation, by a European nation. I've never seen an African man who does seem to strangely have slightly Russian features in parts. But in the face, only very slightly. But I just couldn't believe I'd seen that image, because he's portrayed as empowered. He doesn't look like how Africans would have been portrayed then and now. The stamp is looking upwards at him. He's not at the bottom. There are many things that I thought were really spectacular about just that image alone. So yeah, but my point was that I don't need to see the stamp, but look at it. I've never seen anything. 1961 Soviet stamp but when I look at that stamp a bit more, it sat with me for a while. And I thought, hold up here. Russia has been one of the most brilliant business people. They play the long game. They play the long game. And in my mind, and I just think what I've learned is amazing, but in my mind, that stamp was a pitch for now. Because what they did there was create an alliance, which we're talking about, and I just think that's spectacular. But is that our alliance an earnest one? Because Russia has a habit, and people know it globally, and in films, the baddie is always a Russian, if it's not an African, it's a Russian. And because Russia is regarded as the massive superpower of just taking differently to what America or Britain does. It's got an infrastructure that is unbreakable because it is so Russian. It's so Russian. So their inner narrative has not been interrupted for a very, 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 very long time, unlike Britain's or America's. It stood fast. Whatever it has done, it stood together. It doesn't care about anybody else. So when I look at that stamp and I think that is outrageously marvelous stamp that that Russia designed, even the color palette complements the African. Everything is about complementing the African man in the picture. So I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at that now, and it was done in 1961. It's 2024 now. If Africans saw that stamp, if they felt that they could celebrate that Russia was saying, my brother, I'd be very, 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 very careful. The reason I say that is because Russia is an incredible businessman. They play long, 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 long. Not like America that will go, oh, we're going to invade Grenada. Oh, no, I'm bored of that now. Oh, we're going to do this. Or Britain, who goes, oh, let's send people back to, yeah, let's do this now. These guys know how to play chess. The long game, the long win. And so when I look at that stamp, I think that 1961 pitch, hello, brother, is very, very dangerous, because I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, great, I love seeing this side of Russia. But what happens when Russia is invited into Africa willingly? What do you think will happen then? Because they don't change. They don't change. They have, you know, look what they're doing to Ukraine. You think they're not going to do it to Africa? So this to me is like a first date. Just because a man flatters you, compliments you, has done a bit of research about you beforehand so that he can bring stuff up and tell you about it, just because you walk home feeling ever so beautiful, or whatever you want to call it, just because you ring all your friends and, oh my God, and said, I found the one, I found the one. You end up marrying him and discovering that he's a complete and utter narcissistic psychopath. But I would say the same of this. Take that as a first date, that stamp. I wouldn't be celebrating that at all. Because if 1961 Soviet stamp with slogan freedom to the nations of Africa was in fact an earnest statement on that stamp, what have they been doing for the last 60 years? What did that slogan actually mean? Because I don't recall any Africans, any Russians popping up and going, yo, what about Africa? I'm really worried about them. I haven't seen anything, and I'm in my 50s. So I've not seen that. So this is the long game, and they're making a chess move. They're making a chess move. Remember who are the best people in the world at chess. And these guys have just made a move, and we've just put a pawn forward on our side and gone, yeah, sure. I'm not kidding. I'd be very, 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 very careful. So what I'm saying isn't an attack of the document. I've learned so much. But what I'm saying is, do we actually know their psychopathy? And if we see their psychopathy, they have a history of being Russian, Russian-owned, Russian everything, Russian, 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 Russian. They are not interested in merging with anybody. They may do it on some occasions, but it's only for business. And therefore...
Thanks, Sister Dawn. Sister Dawn, would you like to...
I'm talking a lot, aren't I?
Yeah.
I found it so fascinating. So that's all I would say is, I think the conversation is so interesting, but they play chess very well. Thank you, Roger, that.
Yeah, thank you. Just so I'll let other people speak, but just a quick comment. You talk about the psychopathy of the Russians. How about the psychopathy of the British and the psychopathy of the Americans? I mean,
I'm not. We're talking about Russia. We're talking about Russia, though. So I could talk about the psychopathy of Britain as well. Yeah.
I understand, but we need to put that into context. And then in terms of what Russia might do to Africa, there are those who also said that what would China do to Africa? Some even went as far as say that China was out to recolonize Africa, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so if I had longer, I would have added that. And I'll always have more because I'm very clever. So thank you though for reminding me.
Yeah, but you see, they at the end of the day, I mean, we heard what you've said. There are others here like Jules, who is a beneficiary of Soviet scholarship. Yeah, and he said that 300,000 Africans were educated by the Soviets. I have friends who were educated in the Soviet Union. I have family members, a family member who is married to a Russian woman, you know, so it's been very, very close. So
yeah, I have to come back and put.
Hold on. Whilst the Soviet Union was giving us scholarship, Margaret Thatcher's government was finding means of charging us foreign fees.
Yeah, so I'm going to cut you short just so I can get this out because we could talk about this forever, and it's not that I'm wrong, and I could say as much as you. I'm just saying individuals are always beautiful. There will always be good people all over the world, including Russia. I'm just talking about as a nation as a whole. I'm not talking about individual Russians.
We hear you.
Thank you.
And it's always important to hear both sides. That is why I let you speak your mind and share. Now, in Constantism, it's always our position is that because we are dialecticians, we like to hear both sides of the argument. Yeah, we are not one-sided at all. So thank you very much. Let's now hear from our brother Coco.
Oh, I thought Brother Joseph was.
Brother Coco, just speak. I'm chairing. Just speak, please. I've asked you to speak. You just speak. Thank you. It's no need to say, is it this person? Is it that person? I'm chairing, and I've asked you to speak. Please speak. Thank you.
All right. You're a hard chair, but that's okay. Sister John, your contribution raises lots of questions for me, but I wouldn't delve very much into it. To me, it sounds like what we have been taught in the West to fear the Soviets or the communists or the Reds, whatever they were called. And I would like us to sort of have open minds now to start to think for ourselves and move away from that narrative. That's what's important. Then coming to tonight's session, which is more about the economic angle from the interview that President Putin gave to Tucker Carlson. We haven't discussed that, a lot of that, but I would like to remind us why we are where we are as Africans is because our continent is the richest continent on Earth, on Mother Earth, and that comes with its costs. It comes with both curses as well as, in some cases, opportunities. But unfortunately, for the Africans, they haven't seen as much opportunities as a result of that. The war between Russia and the West continued, and actually it raged on our soil. There was a war, and that war, I think, Brother Glenroy referred to as what happened in Angola. It also happened in Congo. It happened in Ghana. It happened on several African states. And even the frontline states against the apartheid government was again another Cold War because the United States were supporting apartheid South Africa. Their agenda was to empower apartheid South Africa to take over. So they will slowly pull out of the continent. But the important thing is they wanted the American interests safeguarded. And to them, the apartheid South Africa was a key ally in that. So let's not forget the Russians. Even though the Russians did not contribute directly into the Cubans coming here, they supported the Cubans. Castro made sure that they supported them. Moving away from the Cold War into the present, what we are seeing now is that the fiat currency, which is the US dollar reserve currency, is losing power because we have the Brits. The Brits have broken away, and just that, with Russia being part of that, and China and India, all these other bigger states, they are sort of saying enough is enough. And that to us as Africans, it presents a very good opportunity because hopefully most of our elites who have been taking our money and sending it to America will probably keep it here because there's uncertainty as what will happen, but we don't know. We cannot say that. The thing that happens here is a currency represents the strength of an economy. And most of us, we have been pegged to the US currency, the fiat currency, which broke away from the gold standard in 71. And that hasn't happened. We have not been able to do anything. We have not even been able to access the markets because it's who the rating agencies say you are. If they say to you, oh, Ghana is implementing an anti-LGBT law, hence it is a pariah state, like Zimbabwe, they are moving away from you. But with BRICS now on board, and with Russia now fighting against the West as it is happening in Ukraine, it means we do have some allies. We are going to have some allies. And that's what we need. But we need partners. We don't need another big brother to come and fight our fights. We as Africans have to stand up and fight our own fights. But the biggest fight we face as Africans is against our own elites. It's already happened. It has happened in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. And for now, the ball is in our court. Again, we are watching what's happening in Senegal. Ivory Coast, we know things will always be for the French until something happens. Something happens. But the economy, let's not forget, the US has used everything to pull out all the resources from all the corners of the world to prop up the economy. Because without the resources pouring into the US economy, there is nothing. There is nothing of the US economy as we speak right now. Most of the economy is happening elsewhere, but it's perceptions. It's again distractions. We need to know how to value our economies. We have a lot of resources, but we don't know. We are still undervaluing ourselves, underselling ourselves. We are continuing to sell our resources cheaply. Also, not putting too much, a lot of value on them before we sell them. So we need to look at that as a turning point, or the turning point was the war in Ukraine. And let's make it to our advantages. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brother Kuku. Yes, Brother Pigeon.
I would like, if you permit me, in this minutes where I've marked this interview for only 2 minutes, Putin talks about the dollar issue and the exchange of things. If you'll allow me, let me.
Yes, no, do. But before you play it, I thank Brother Kuku for raising that matter of the dollar, because Putin makes it clear the implications of that. Now, and he, as you will explain that it was never their intention not to use the dollar, but what America has done basically is to destroy the base of its own currency. So now nobody believes that they should hold the dollar as a reserve currency, because if you do and you're on the wrong side of America, they'll just steal your money. Now, the point for us, as far as that is concerned, is one of the things that Brother Kuku has raised, which is, will that mean that our elites, who always steal our money and go and put them in European banks and in foreign banks in dollars, will this let them wake up because in Russia today, people the elites keep their money in Russia. With Africa, the money leaves our continent. So yeah, so brother Pigeon, yes, let's listen. Thank you very much.
Approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar. We had no such intention. It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United States across the world. By the way, our transactions in yuan accounted for about 3%. Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles and about as much, a little over 34% in yuan. Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit. They probably thought it would lead to full collapse, but nothing collapsed. Moreover, other countries, including oil producers, are thinking of and already accepting payments for oil in yuan. Do you even realize what is going on or not? Does anyone in the United States realize this? What are you doing? You are cutting yourself off. All experts say this. Ask any intelligent and thinking person in the United States what the dollar means for the US. You're killing it with your own hands.
I think that's I think that's a fair assessment. The question is what comes next, and maybe you trade one colonial power for another, much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean, is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy?
Brother Pigeon, can you pause here for a moment? Can you pause here for a moment? And the part you're about to also play is very important for us. Now, on the question of the dollar and what America itself is doing to the dollar, the question for us Africans, I think our leaders are asleep. But what it means for us is that since Gaddafi was killed over this currency matter, now that America itself is killing the currency, that now creates room for us to continue the Gaddafi experiment or vision of a united continental currency, for us to continue it. He was prepared to back it with Libyan gold. I don't know which African country or countries who made their gold available to back this currency. But the idea, and Saddam Hussein also was killed for this, the idea was that if you buy something from another country, you don't pay with dollars. So if Ghana buys things from Kenya, why don't we pay Kenya in an African currency or in Kenyan shillings? And then if Kenya buys something from Ghana, we pay in Ghanaian cedi. Why do we have to use the currency of an imperialist nation in order to trade? And then we are told by John, you know, we hear that somehow these people are psychopaths. Well, I'm not sure.
I didn't say they were psychopaths. I said the psychopathy of the nation. I have to make that really clear.
Yeah,
really clear, because that's a very damaging thing to say about my personality. I said the psychopathy. Psychopathy is what every nation has as a nation. And I just wanted to make that clear. I never said Russians were psychopaths. I said the psychopathy of a nation.
But John, I mean, as far as I understand, psychopathy is an illness, isn't it?
No, psychopathy of a nation. Britain, you said, has one. America, agreed. But at no point did me, Joan, ever say that Russia was psychopaths. I never said that. I said the psychopathy. It's just my name.
Yeah, that's good. John, thank you for clarifying that, because I thought I heard you mention Russian films and how psychopathic they were. So anyway, thanks for that clarification. Okay, so brother Pigeon, can you play the China part? Thank you.
Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again. Through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europeans, aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China. It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself. It is a delicate matter, and there are no silver bullet solutions, just as it is with the dollar. So, before introducing any illegitimate sanctions, illegitimate in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, one should think very carefully. For decision makers, this appears to be a problem.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Pigeon. Thank you very much for that as well. Now, the point we want to make here, when I say we here, the Consensus Study Group, the point we want to make about this point is that, this China thing is that, we are sold a story that the strategic competitor of the West is China. So what it means in resource terms is that in terms of control and dominance, in terms of global dominance and the world's resources, it is China that is the direct competitor for the US. Now, the word competitor itself should make us wake up. When we say someone is a competitor with another person, that means they are competing over somebody else or something else. Now, I don't know if we all know, but the Second World War was a competition over Africa. That is what the Second World War was about. In effect, they were fighting over us, Africans. And here we have this language of China being a competitor for the West. Again, competitor over what? Over Africa's resources. So now here is the thing, and this is what some of us are saying, and Brother Kwame Gonza is not here, but I think he would say the same thing. The real agenda here is the continued dominance of the African and his or her resources. That is what this is all about. This Ukraine war that they wanted to, break up Russia into small bits to control it, as they did in the 1980s after the Soviet collapse, and then to take on China. The real agenda is that they will continue. When I say they, I mean Western elites, not the Western people. Because the Western people have no problem. They have no trouble with us. We don't have any fight with us. If you see how they voted in the last election in Rochdale, you can see that the ordinary people do not buy into this elitist psychopathy. And psychopathy is a neuropsychiatric disorder marked by a deficient emotional responses, lack of empathy, and poor behavioral controls, which will explain why anything they want to go to war. Now, this word has come up in the terms within the context of Russia And those of us who are, you know, for those who are pro-Russian, they will find it offensive. But those who are not and are dialectical will say, okay, that is a way of saying that there are two sides to one coin. That's fine. It's okay. But that's what psychopathy means. And if psychopathy is going to come up within the context of a Carlson-Russian interview, then we are reminded about psychopathy. Well, I think it's fair for us to also remind ourselves about Western psychopathy as well. And I think it's been mentioned. But it's been mentioned, yes. But we have lived as Africans, you know, we have lived the psychopathy of the West. So, for example, whilst Europeans were leaving the continent, the psychopathic Americans moved in to take the place of the Europeans. And so America became the new neo-colonial dominant force in Africa and now controlling the whole continent, with Britain as a junior brother or junior sister, as it were. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that the real competitor, and we are not competitors, by the way, because the resources are ours. Africa's resources belong to Africans. So we don't have to compete with anyone over what belongs to us. It is ours. It is ours, and they are being controlled, they are being managed illegitimately by psychopaths, if we can all now freely use that word. And so the real agenda is that the psychopaths want to continue to control our continent, to control our government, to control our resources, and that is what this war is about. And that is why this Putin interview is very important for us. It's opened our eyes. We've heard from himself the agenda, what the agenda was for Russia. But we are saying that it goes beyond Russia, beyond China, and back to Africa. America and the West want to continue to control us. And this is what we want to bring to your attention as a Consensusism study group. Thank you. Let's now hear from others. There was another point that he made that I think is also crucial for us, which I think we should also discuss, which is the idea that the reserve currency now should be linked to resources. Now, since Africa has a lot of resources, if the reserve currency is resources, suddenly Africa's position will be transformed. We'll become one of the richest continents because now resources become the reserve currency. How can we have resources and paper is the reserve currency? How can paper, the dollar is just paper. How can paper be the reserve currency and not resources? It just doesn't make sense. But what America did in terms of the dollar when it seized Russian assets, dollar assets, and moved and prevented Russia from using the SWIFT system, what it has done is that it has created an opportunity for not just BRICS, but our African governments, for a united government, that is a United Nations of Africa, and a Central African government. If our leaders are awake, and we know they are not, because they're all liberals and conservatives. And that's why we need radical Pan-Africanists to begin to move. We need to move and fight for electoral victory at the ballot box. Thank you very much. I'll stop there. Let's hear from others who haven't spoken. Mary X. Thank you.
Hi, this is hi everyone. Grand Rising.
Sorry, Sister Mary. I'll come back to Brother Joseph and Brother Jules later. Let's hear from others, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you, Sister Mary. Carry on.
Right, it's very, very short. Okay, so like we're always talking about our leaders who've been bumped off by the West, yeah, and it still continues with recent murders of our leaders in Africa as well as the Caribbean, right? And all we do is talk about it. We don't take constructive action. I mean, call it what you like, the black pound, the black euro, the black dollar is very powerful. Why are we not using that every time they hurt one of our own?
Good question. So Sister Marie has asked us
rhetorical question. I'll leave it for you to think about. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that rhetorical
Okay.
question. Why are we not doing what Sister Marie is? As a reminder, Sister Marie is an action-oriented sister. She always wants to know what must we do, what should we do. So thanks for reminding us again, Sister Marie. Let's now go to Sister Myra. Thank you.
No, just to say that I kind of want to echo what Brother Coco said. He said we don't want a big brother telling us what to do, and much as I think we shouldn't be deluded and think that Russia wants our liberation more than we do as Africans. I think we as Africans are the ones that want that want our freedom the most, right? And we should be clear that we need to take the lead in this liberation struggle while Russia is a helper. So we need to be clear and not wait to be told what to do. And I feel like we ought to be at that table with them as equals. In fact, leading. They should be the ones asking us, where do you need help? And we say, with this, that, and the other, not the other way around. So that's just something for me that will be the caution. And at this point, having listened to all the other contributors, really, we do need help. Like Brother Coco said, we do need help. We can't do this alone. It's a huge system that has been in place for centuries. And at the moment, we have to use the best that we have. And the enemy of our enemy is our friend. But we ought to be the leaders in this. We ought to be the voices that take the lead in this, in our own liberation, in our own struggles.
Thank you very much. Sister Ida.
I don't really know what I have to say, because we seem to be arguing other things apart from the Putin, in a way, apart from the Putin Carlson interview, in that I thought we'd hear.
Sister Ada, we've just listened to the interview.
Yes, I heard that, but we've only got 15 minutes left almost. But irrespective of that, what would I say? I would say that I thought the interview was a good interview that has stirred up a lot of people thinking about what is going on. And I think that we need to be thinking more about economics. For instance, today I was on another Zoom for Sudan, where they were talking, it was all about economics. And I suddenly got to find out what state capture really meant. And I think that until we know enough about what is going, the economics of what is going on in Africa, and see it for what it is, we'll always be thinking, oh, you know, we need other people's money, we need this, we need that. So I think that economics is a very important topic, and we should, if we knew enough about it as ordinary everyday people, we would be fighting a lot more for things than we do at the moment. Just like Sister Marie was asking, you know, what action, or the action that could be taken with the Black Pound. I think it's the fact that a lot, apart from those who are economists, a lot of people don't understand the economics of it all. So I do think the interview was important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's go to Brother Michael. Michael, 5X. If Michael is not ready, let's go to Shola, please. Unmute yourself and speak, please. Thank you. Shola? Okay, so Chola is not speaking. So let's go to Brother Everton, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody. You know, very interesting debate. Some points in history is sort of like enlightened my grey cells, you know. Going back to the liberation wars that was fought, you know, in my learning at the time, it was the weapon systems, you know, and we know that, well, I was taught or, you know, picked up that the weaponry was Kalashnikov, not M16s, and whether it was Cuba that fronted it or Russia that fronted it, it was a Russian weapon. I think that a lot of people, obviously over a period of time, have forgotten that. So we've got this thing about Russia. And that is due to propaganda, the West, and as it goes, you know, and I always thought, or the group that I moved around in the time was, well, we saw that, we acknowledged that there was a struggle between Russia and the West. And it turned out that it was. I was very young at the time. So, you know, our reasoning at the time, the group that I moved with, yeah, our reasoning at the time was borne it out. And it was a war. The Cold War was an African war against the West for an African soil. And people should remember also that all the major countries in the West was back in the apartheid regime of South Africa against Russia, Cuba, you know, and I just think that we should go back and revisit it, you know, people like Khrushchev and other names that was mentioned, you know, it's sort of like, it was a trip down memory lane and, you know, very good discussion anyway. So yeah, we should actually go back and revisit the struggles, the armed struggle, which a few months ago, I pointed out to people that South Africa was a nuclear armed state at the time. And we triumphed over them. We beat them. Whether it was we beat them with the aid of Russia and our allies, what's wrong with that? You know, now you know that the West has got their allies and nobody ever steps across the line without calling their allies or their gangs together. We done it with the help of the Russians and the Cubans. So that's it, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Everton, for taking us down the memory lane, as Brother Gloria also did earlier. Ross Christopher. Unmute yourself and speak. Otherwise, we'll go to Shaza X. Just unmute yourself and share your views, please. Okay. Right. So we go back to those who have raised their hand, since now everyone has a chance to speak, except Brother DJ, Mr. P. You haven't spoken, have you?
No, I haven't. Thanks for remembering me.
Yeah, I'm looking through my list, making sure everybody has spoken, and you haven't spoken. So, yeah, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm listening.
Okay, all right. So let's go back to, thank you. So let's go back to Brother Joseph again.
Yes, it's interesting when some of us speak. We speak out of ignorance and also expect that to be taken as fact. Most of what was highlighted this evening, tonight here, I've been familiar with it. Some of it I've lived it. So I go a lot with direct experience. What I also know is that most of the bias, the implicit or explicit bias we have, didn't originate in us. It was implanted in us. So without examining how do you arrive at certain posture, a certain attitude towards different people will continue to perpetuate those stuff that have been pumped in us. Now, when I was studying in Trinidad in the late 70s, I remember attending a lecture by a man called Dr. Neville Linton, and he was the international advisor to the Secretary General of the Caribbean Conference of Churches. And I remember he being asking a question about world dominance. And he did say, for instance, he said, while China do have the capacity to evolve, China is limited on the basis of their population. In the case of the Soviet Union, Russia, even though Russia were on its own, like without the other republic, it has quite a bit of resources. Its challenge would be population. But he said this. He said, Africa, on the other hand, its major problem at the time was its population size. But he said, Africa have all what is needed. And in time, the population will rise. What have happened to the Africans is that because the Chinese and the Indians and others have been trying to limit their population, we have sort of come up to them now. So with the resources and the people, young population, there's so much potential, and does. Indeed, the real threat is not China. China may aid in the process, Russia too. But even if you listen to Putin, you would see that, I mean, the humility in the man, whether you like him or not. And the other thing about it, I know I can't take all the time. The sister talk about long game. No American president or Western leaders, with few exceptions if there's any, maybe with the exception of Barack Obama, could give a lengthy interview, a lengthy conversation. They cannot. And this man, as Tucker Carlson said, they had to stop the interview themselves. He didn't stop it. You can see a learned man. Those people who are running in America, they just happen to have power and might and destroying the world. So we have to bear that in mind without closing our eyes to inconsistency. I mean, of course, we're human beings, and there'll be many conflicts. By the way, Brother Kwame, you didn't say that Brother George Padmore, was a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, the very Caribbean from which I'm speaking from. Thank you very much. I know I can continue, but very interested and stimulating conversation again.
Oh,
thanks.
Yeah, yes, Brother Joseph, I am aware he's from Trinidad. Yes. Thank you very much. Yes, so the next person to speak is Brother Jules.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. This group is one of the best I ever seen and took part in. Let me tell you that President Vladimir Putin is studied at St. Petersburg Law University with many African students, even with many West African students. That is one. In Russia now, there's still a very strong African diaspora, and a very famous Ghanaian journalist, Keste Klomega. If you want, I can give you his contact so that he will be cooperating with your newspaper. I can tell you that
it's not our newspaper. It's a newspaper we read when we meet. But
okay.
Yeah,
no
we are
problem.
happy to. Brother Pigeon will take his details.
Okay.
And we're happy to connect with him.
Okay. But I want to tell you that Africa is still colonized because the elites, most of our elite in Africa are pro-Western. Pro-Russian, I can't say maybe one president, one. The other who want to be close to Russia, they are waiting for them. I mean, Western, the West is just making them not to be close to Russia. Now about the economic empowerment. I have worked in the geology sector, sometimes. Most of the maps, geology maps, who give us the real content of our mineral, of our soil, was given or made with Russia collaboration or Soviet Union collaboration. Those maps are in the West, but the West doesn't want to show us. So why we should speak about the empowerment of dollars or something like that? What can we do to have a cedi strong, naira strong? I don't want to talk about CFA, the currency CFA, because the CFA currency is still printed in France. There is a need of the colonization of the continent, and let's think about it. I have heard about a lot of constructing ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Glenroy.
Yes, I forgot to say earlier on your remark from a statement or something, I can't recall, that the way to end poverty, I'm not sure that was what the words were used, but was to give poor people money. Well, I think the thing to do is...
Brother, I didn't say that. It was in the newspaper,
well,
the continent.
It was read, stated. Anyway, I just think the solution isn't that. The solution is to remove the money from the rich. Because at the end of the day, they are left to keep their money, and poor people are given money. Poor people would perhaps join the rich or whatever, or become their subordinates. So I wanted to say that. But the thing about the dollar, what was clear, what Putin was saying is that was for a time they had to trade in dollar because that was what the global community was trying to force on them. But since the sanction, they've demanded payment in rubles. So I think that any nation can take that approach. Now, of course, some people are just frightened to challenge the West, whether it's Europe, Britain, or the US. But we're going to get forced into that situation sooner or later. So we might as well, in African states, start making those demands. Now, those are some of the things that the Sahel should be monitored about, how they're going to treat that. I haven't heard what is being replaced in the CF, how that is playing out. I would expect with the situation with France that it's changed. Problem is ready alternative. I heard that they were going to print their own money. That was good. But the issue is they're going to create small economy. And this is where, to be quite honest, I would rather people have taken over ECOWAS, but political decisions aren't made. That we need one of those regions to actually make an effort. I see it's 58. Make an effort to actually change that dynamics about using the dollar. Somebody has to step up, and I don't know where BRICS is, so I won't speak on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Glenroy, for being mindful of time. As a chair yourself, you are very conscious of time. We've got 2 minutes left. So, Sister John and Brother Coco, you'll have to share it 1 minute each. So, Brother Coco, Sister John is not behind a chair. So, Coco, can you speak, please? Go 1 minute. Thank you. Starting now.
Simply, one thing we haven't discussed here is the military-industrial complex. With the weapons companies continuing in the West to continue to print or to continue to produce weapons, there will never be peace in the world. And hence, that will be their modus operandi when it comes to economics from the West. And we need to move away from that. And I would like to say, Alliance of the Sahel is important. It's not a small economy. It's a big economy and a shifting economy as far as we are concerned. So we have to encourage them and to protect them. With regards to the sanctions, we can sanction the West. We need to start sanctioning the West in answers to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sister John, you've got a minute as well, starting now.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, this is fascinating, and I'm really glad that Sister Ida suggested we watch it. I've learned an enormous amount. In summary, I've probably hit the minute mark already, but in summary, I think it's very important that we understand that there are beautiful people who are going to look after us in every country. Those are individuals, individual organizations and people wherever we are in the world. But I'll make it clear that as a nation's voice, Putin's voice is what they do. And what's happening to Ukraine at the moment tells you everything you need to know. So
14 seconds.
Yeah, I didn't. Thank you. I don't think Russians are psychopaths. I said they were portrayed in movies as psychopaths, and I said that Africans are always the ones that are demonized, but the other ones they always demonize in the movies are Russians. So I didn't say that. And when we speak about something, Sister Mira said, I loved what she said. Apart from when we say the enemy of our enemy is that they're our friend, that is not that's not the case. I'd worry about that. The enemy of our enemy is our friend is something that we would need to really think about because everybody has their agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Pigeon. Brother Pigeon, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much, Brother Kwame, for sharing
this. Yeah, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody who have joined us today. Indeed, it was a very thought-provoking session. And this is what we do every Saturday. We discuss various topics in relation to Africa. And yeah, we discuss them sometimes to learn because it has been an opportunity for us all to learn. So I want to thank everybody who has contributed to this conversation today. I want to thank Brother Kwame for sharing this. And next Saturday, we might think about the path for the continuation of colonization. Now that the West Africa is coming in, and we are looking forward to discuss that and how the French have been explaining the West African and the development on the West Africa, because there's a possibility of some unity coming, or real unity coming from the South African, western part of the Africa. So we're looking forward to that conversation next Saturday. We'll be sharing our invite to all of you in our broadcast list. And this Thursday, we will continue the class for Consciousism. We do read the book called Consciousism by Kwame Nkrumah. It's the philosophy and ideology for decolonizing Africa. So please find time also to attend our Thursday classes where we develop some of these thoughts and this thinking that then lead to our Saturday classes. So without wasting my time, I want to appreciate you all and thank you for your attendance today. Get into our YouTube channel. You'll get all our previous recording and we'll always share these recordings once they are on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Brother Kwame.
Yeah, that's it, Pigeon. You can now stop the recording and yeah, thank everyone for coming.